Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested. I'm here at Oculus Game Days where they're showing a bunch of games are coming out for the Oculus Rift. Now some developers are working with Oculus Studios to make games for the Rift, and I'm here with David, who's with Gunfire Games, and your guys' game is Chronos.
Correct.
Chronos is like an action RPG for virtual reality.
Yep, it's kind of a mixture of old school adventure games and RPG games.
People have been using VR, like on the Gear VR, for example, may have played your earlier game, Hero Bound, which I love. I love that kind of the walking around just using a gamepad. So it's a game really suited for looking around VR, but playing with a gamepad, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And the idea is that you want to have a player, or the character, move across the screen, but the camera is in a fixed position. Can you talk about the design decision behind that, how it affects gameplay and comfort?
Sure. So, I mean, one thing we knew right away when we made Chronos was we wanted a rather large game. The game's like 12 to 14 hours long. So we wanted someone to be able to sit down and play 2, 3, 4 hours. And so we decided no camera movement, because that's the most comfortable way you can do that. And so once we had decided that, then we wanted to come up with a camera system where it was a little more immersive than Hero Bound, so more pulled in, but also still fixed camera, and that's sort of how we ended up with the camera system in Chronos.
It kind of reminds me of the old flat screen, like a Zelda game, where when you move from dungeon room to dungeon room, you would get that room. And is that how you approach designing the levels, where it's a sequence of different rooms and from different, each with a unique perspective?
Yeah, and one thing, like in Hero Bound, we had an issue where like you'd move to the right and the guy would come on the left and you had to like look over. So we did a lot of stuff to always make sure your character was in view. So you played it and you noticed that you never lost sight of your guy.
That's right.
Which is probably the big difference between this and say Hero Bound.
It also feels like you have to play the role of a cinematographer or photographer, because the placement of your camera has to aesthetically look beautiful as well as being functional. You know, if I'm walking from the left side screen in, then you have to put items in the foreground to make it look interesting, create places with shadow and light to direct the player, but also hide enemies and puzzles.
Yep, absolutely, which was pretty challenging because just getting the cameras right was hard in the first place, but also making sure, A, that the stuff you can see is cool, and B, we try to telegraph where you're going to go next by the vistas you're looking at, and also the fact that the player can just turn around and look down and everything's got to be interesting.
It's meant to be played with the player mostly in one position, whether it's sitting or standing and looking at the environment. How varied is the camera in terms of how close it is to the character, how far it pulls back? Or
it varies from shot to shot. I mean, we try to keep it down at character height for the most part because we want you to feel like you're in the game, but there are times for dramatic shots it'll pull out or it'll be more, wide range shot or whatever, but yeah, we try to keep it in a little closer just so you feel like you're there.
That also has to be functional for combat.
Yeah,
because there's a great combat system. You have to use a shield, roll, you might be fighting multiple enemies at the same time, lock onto them, so you have to give the character enough space to maneuver.
Yeah,
right?
And that's also would dictate the camera in the rooms depending if there is combat there or there isn't combat there.
So tell me about the environments, because it looks like, I played 2 of the environments, it looks like a pretty expansive game. How is it all connected and what type of environments can people jump into?
So we wanted to have a lot, again, I mean, for me, the thing I love about fantasy is the variety you can have, right? You can just do all kinds of crazy stuff. So we wanted to have a lot, and there's a lot of cool different environments in the game. And we wanted to have sort of a fairy tale feel to it, so it's not like, there's a little bit of darkness in the game, but there's a lot of beauty too. Like everywhere you go has a lot of beauty to it, and it just sort of gives it that fairy tale quality, which we wanted to capture with the game.
Did you kind of identify the different fantasy environment areas that you guys like? The woodland area, cave area, and then find a way, make a story mechanic to tie them all together?
Yeah, amazingly enough, and this has literally never happened on a game I worked on, but the areas we outlined when we started are the areas we made, which was really cool. Usually you change or drop one or add a new one, but yeah, we did a rough outline in the beginning, and that's exactly what we ended up putting in the game, which is cool.
The game is called Chronos, and there is a temporal aspect to the game. Can you explain that?
Yeah, every time your character dies, they age by 1 year, which is interesting because all your stats and abilities change. So when you're young, it's really easy to get stronger or more agile, but as you get old, you can't. So if you're 70 or 60, 70, 80 years in the game, you actually can't even get stronger anymore. But at that point, your magic ability starts to increase.
Is there an arc? Like,
so your physical abilities go down, your magical ability. So we always joked it's like you start as Strider and you end as Gandalf, because it kind of crosses. But
wow! And then the story and the levels are designed to accentuate that, so you can explore playing different environments with the different abilities.
Yeah, and it's also tied to your skill level because magic's harder to do. Magic's based on like time blocks or timed evades and stuff like that. And in the beginning of the game, you're not very good at them. You don't do them very often. And then later in the game, you do them a lot. But those attacks do a lot of magical damage. So it kind of corresponds with, as you get better at the game, now you can build up your arcane and start to really master the game.
Now, the fixed camera obviously meant for comfort. Now, what about player movement? What have you done? What have you tweaked for the player speed and how many actions you can do at once to make it comfortable and fun?
There wasn't really a comfortability issue with the player, but one thing we did do is we wanted the game to be a little more deliberate. It's not a really fast-paced, spammy action system. You want to block, take it slow, and that corresponds with the fact that when people play the game, they want to look around and enjoy the environment. We didn't want them just rushing through the game. And there's also a lot of puzzles in the game, so you have to be aware of your environment. So we really wanted to just slow it down a little bit so people didn't just blast through everything too fast.
I got mostly the shield and the sword, and you mentioned there's magic later. Can you tease some of the other abilities that will be happening later
Yeah,
in the
there's
game?
a bunch of different weapons, there's different shields. You get these things called Dragonstone, or I can't remember where it comes. We always have in development names for things, but they're like these little stones that go in your hand that give you special powers, and you get different ones, and some might have different abilities depending on what kind of powers inside of them. And then there's a ton of puzzle items you find that you can use to solve, and that's more Resident Evil-y, where you're solving different puzzles. You might find a sheet of music or a weird locket or a key and all those different things. You got to figure out how to use them to progress through the game.
Chronos is a single-player game. Did you guys experiment any with multiplayer, any co-op, anything like that?
We only had a year to make it, so we stayed very focused. We wanted to make the best single-player experience as possible.
Wow, a year to make Chronos, and it's coming out very soon, along with the Rift.
Yeah, March 28th.
March 28th. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, and I can't wait to play the full game. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Jeremy, we just played some Chronos. What did you think?
Well, I think it fills a niche. A lot of the games here, they're encapsulated experiences, and you sit down and you play in this one environment, or it's really fast paced, and you don't want to play for that long because it's pretty intense. This is more of a long game where you're going to sit down and you're going to play this game. I think they're estimating 12 to 14 hours to finish the entire game, and people are talking about playing it within 5-hour segments at a time. This is a comfortable game where you sit down in an environment and you can play it for quite a long time without any kind of fatigue.
Right, and with this first wave of VR games, you see a lot of adaptations from traditional genres, and you could look at Chronos and you can say, okay, this is Zelda for VR.
Yeah.
But when you just say Zelda for VR, there's so many ways you could execute that. You can have the camera fixed behind a person. You can have, changing camera points. They decided to have this one fixed camera point.
Right, for every room.
For every room.
Kind of like Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil, right?
Right. And it was super comfortable. Like Hero Brown proved that.
Yeah.
Where the Gear VR game, I could play that for almost hours, no problem, because you were pulled back and you're just looking at the player here. But in this game, what was different was they put cameras in interesting parts of every room.
It was built for the ground up for VR, so they actually designed every room with one camera position in mind,
And it's not so much that you want to engage or move into that space, but it was very beautiful where, with every room, I was excited to see how the camera would be positioned in the next room to see what that scene would be like.
Yeah, I will say I felt like it was a little more compelling when the combat was closer to the camera. I think that's part of the trade-off. If you're going to have that lockdown camera and you're going to have action happening away from it, that's kind of the price you pay for having a very comfortable game. Because I think if you were to move the camera around a lot and maybe do a tracking kind of experience, it would be a little more, you might induce nausea within some players, you'd certainly introduce a little more fatigue.
The combat was very deliberate, and that was something they told me, it wasn't just button smash and doing crazy moves, you had to think about it. I think that's what's going to make it a fun game.
Oh yeah. Fighting one guy is difficult. Fighting two guys, I don't even know if I succeeded at that one time. There's a lot of combat, strategy and putting up your shield, and then when to slash, when to duck, when to dive. The fighting mechanic is pretty well done in terms of, requiring a certain amount of skill.
And for a lot of people who doubt whether these first wave of VR games are going to feel like short experiences or long ones, this one feels like it can be a long one.
Yeah, I think that was their design goal, and it stands unique, I think, among all of these games here as being the game that is the time commitment to experience the full narrative arc.
I will say that in the very first entry level I played, there was a little bit of backtracking, and I hope that they're not going to use backtracking as a crutch to extend the game time.
Right.
That it's going to actually be always moving forward and always discovering new environments.
Yeah, I'm sure as the developer saw you have to backtrack, I think he was probably feeling a little bit of no, you're not supposed to do that. I want to jump in and tell you what to do.
Right.
So we're still sort of playtesting here. It'll be interesting to see where these games are, even in 2 weeks, because they're probably still tweaking.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait for it to come out.
Yeah.